I'm Aryeh Schwartz along with Ben Dull, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. Last week we went long covering the Western Conference teams, talking about what we feel they should do this WNBA free agency period. Well, today we're breaking down and going long on the Eastern Conference. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community, patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. While you're there, check out our overseas tracker. It's live now. You can see where your favorite WNBA players are playing overseas, all in one place. This should be a good one. Giving our takes on what teams should do in free agency, we put on our GM cap and tell you who to target, what they need, and more. Today, we're breaking down the Eastern Conference. Ben, how's it going, and Happy New Year's?
Happy New Year.
I never know if I'm supposed to say Happy New Year or Happy New Year's. What's the proper one?
I think year. It's just 1 year, right? 2021.
I guess, but it's a bridge between 2 years. Whatever. I gotta get it wrong. Well, I want to talk about something when it comes to the East Coast teams or the Eastern Conference teams. I feel like we kind of need to do this a little bit different, and I'm blindsiding you. Mainly because 3/4 of our non-playoff teams are in this grouping. So we kind of need to decide, I think, at least for those teams, we as, with our GM caps or whatever, kind of need to preface those teams with the mindset of they're like one trade, one signing away from being a playoff contender, or they're kind of more in the let our players grow in their youth mindset. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, because that should influence how teams are behaving in free agency and what their goals are.
And like that's the thing, because I feel like at the end of the day, it's pretty easy for us to look at all these teams and be like, oh yeah, sign Candace Parker, sign, Nneka Ogwumike or Natasha Howard, somebody like that, and all of a sudden this team's a winner. But that honestly, as crazy as this sounds, it might not be in the best interest of a team to add a superstar when they might not necessarily fit in with the build of this team, and then you kind of you cause issues with your younger players and their growth, and obviously you might make you closer to making the playoffs, but ultimately that could hurt you in your chances for winning a championship, which makes me think of what's better to, it doesn't matter if you make the playoffs and you don't win the championship, but that's a whole different discussion that we can debate on. Why don't we start it off with the Chicago Sky? Give me your thoughts on them. What do you feel they need to take that next step in their growth as a WNBA franchise and get closer to that championship caliber pedigree?
Well, I think they have they're pretty set on the perimeter, even in 1 through 3, and then you include Kalia Copper in that, who's going to be a high minute player. So really, just you look at the front court, and if they kind of really quote unquote go for it and just take a bigger swing, you would look for one of these top front court players that would really make a difference for them defensively. And because we're talking about basically all WNBA players, which are in the top of that class this year, obviously there's a lot that each of them would add offensively too. But other than that, you can have kind of the top of the wish list, but other than that, I think really it's also just making sure they re-sign their own free agent Cheyenne Parker, which I think has to probably tie into this, because if from Parker's standpoint is, would she want an assurance that she's going to start? How might that dynamic kind of factor into?
I mean, looking at who their free agents are, we're talking about Sydney Colson, we're talking about Cheyenne Parker. For me, I mean, obviously, I have written down they need more paint defense, maybe a backup point guard, cool, fine, whatever. That's not the most important thing. I mean, can they bring back Colson? Probably. She's probably also going to get some attention from other teams. But I feel Parker's their big play, but also Azrae Stevens really cemented herself as a player who, moving forward, there's a lot of positivity for. They could play her at the five, they could play her at the four. And I think this team really boils down to where is the future that they see for Diamond DeShields and Azrae Stevens. Now, obviously, Diamond had a setback of a season. She was never fully healthy. She ends up leaving the Wubble early. But Azrae Stevens blew up on the scene, really started to show us something that we were hoping we could see in Dallas. Never really got her footing there, never really got on the court enough to show us what she got. Obviously, she left the bubble also early before the season ended. So, is it as simple as if you're head coach, GM, James Wade, you're sitting there and going, we got to bring back our roster? A healthy roster is a very different Chicago Sky team than we saw this year. And maybe they can, I don't want to say ignore the pitfall that was this past year, but there were some high expectations going into this past season. Do you think this is a situation, if you're GM, you're like, all right, let me try and hit a home run, bring in a big name? Or is it more of a situation of settle down and don't overreact?
Well, I don't think they should overreact, but I would also say the answer is probably both. I think you've got to look at the again like that, you know, top list of players available and really decide first, do we actually want to make a run at some of these players? You know, Natasha Howard, I think would be the top of my list for them, especially if she doesn't get cored by Seattle. You know, I think that would be the one name I would circle. Maybe, you know, Neko Gumake. I know a lot of. I know it's there. There's naturally been. We've all seen dozens of Candace Parker. Would she go to Atlanta or Chicago? Uh, Tweets since the season ended. So it just. I think they have to answer that question for themselves. But then I think it's very likely that they end up just more or less bringing the team together. I mean, the other thing too, I think Chicago is. I think there maybe are some trade concepts you might at least try to piece together and consider that you think might upgrade the team. I don't know how likely they are, but you have, because then looking ahead to next year too, that you're talking about basically eight rotation players that are going to hit free agency at the same time. So it just, I think they kind of have to have everything mapped out of, you know, who's on our dream wish list and then how long is it, and the scenario where you more or less run it back, how much do you believe in that, and also is it going to be a problem? And yeah, re-signing Parker is really the only thing there. You know, you mentioned Colson. I would think they'll have the chance to bring her back if they want, or they can pursue some other options for backup point guard.
Well, when you talk trade, who you thinking about? Because I have a couple names of, just looking at the salary sheet. Shout out to Her Hoop Stats, who made it beautifully laid out on their website. Everyone should go check it out. One of the interesting things for me is Steph Dolson, a 175,000 salary. That's a guarantee. Is that a player? Because you know me, never been a huge fan of her game. Always been critical of her. Is that a person that you're looking at saying, maybe if we could move her, that frees up some salary? Because right now they don't have a ton of cap room.
Well, I mean, I think I could understand bringing Dolson up just because if you're looking at Parker as the starter, anyways, in Dolson's case, I don't know if that I don't know if trading Dolson, if the exact same deal is bringing you back of the player that would essentially supplant her. I mean, because Dolson, that's on a pretty big contract, and it's just I don't. I mean, like none of the really good teams without some more movement, or if they really lose out on some of their own players, they're just not gonna like it. Won't it doesn't make sense at this stage for any of them to look to take on a bigger salary. You know who like who's in the running as a contender that could trade for Dolson, and she'd definitely be starting. So it just
None.
other things could happen, and I think Dolson might be one player where I think there might be a temptation. That's one player I'm not overreacting to, where she had the ankle stuff and then came back and just never really kind of had a chance to play a prolonged stretch and get her minutes up. But I don't know. I think it would have to be a kind of a chain of events with including a couple different things for them if they really shook it up. But
So I mean, it sounds like we're both in agreement that there's not much wiggle room for the Chicago Sky team. I mean, at best, they're looking at re-signing Parker. If Parker's not around, if they're not able to wrangle her in, who are some players that you would target? Off top of my head, Jessica Breland is someone who kind of pops in. Um, Brianna Jones would be, but salary monetarily, whatever I want to say. It's been a long day. Would be a little bit of an issue there. But talk to me about players that, let's say, Cheyenne Parker is not available for them to re-sign because she is a hot commodity. Who would you look like or look to try and bring onto this roster and fill that role?
that's tough. Actually, first for Parker, well, okay, yeah. I mean, I'll just never mind. I'll just go with what you said. I think unless you're getting a Natasha Howard, one of those stars, kind of in somehow in that front court conversation, I think you're looking at like I would like Tiana Hawkins maybe. You mentioned Azrae Stevens maybe could play some five, and Hawkins is just somebody that can somewhat credibly stretch the floor. I think that would be important. Maybe Glory Johnson, uh, not a tremendous shooter out there, but can at least play out there a little bit, and maybe can give you something defensively. If we're talking about in this case, I mean, bringing somebody off the bench behind Dolson and Stevens, right? I mean, I think that's what we'd be talking about at this point.
Yeah, man, as that would be, wouldn't be bad. I mean, for me, I just don't think. I mean, I've said this over and over. I think it's just like it comes down to Dolson's fit with this team and her ability to run with this team. Looking at the different rosters, though, I gotta say, put obviously like you touched on this earlier. Candace Parker not likely going to Chicago, but there's been talk about it, just like in fanfare of oh my god, what if she did? Or even Natasha Howard, like those two players on this roster would make me, if I'm James Wade, foam at the mouth of excitement and joy because I just feel like that's such a great fit, and there just aren't so many bigs that are available right now that could really run with it. I mean, Amanda Zawi B as a backup, not a bad option for this team. What do you think about that?
I think I would even lean more towards the names that I threw out there. I think if that's what maybe just like if I don't know if Zowie is really giving them a different look and someone that can kind of give them a different option defensively. And I think Dolson's a better all around offensive player. Because I mean, the other thing I was going to bring up too, just on the topic of Parker, is they already have Vandersloot, Quigley, Dolson, and Copper with pretty big salaries. So, and why I also brought up the idea of if they make a trade in some form and are kind of move some pieces around, they can't like in a vacuum again with those four players and then these other players on the rest of the roster, like just they can't just throw a giant offer at the upper max to go sign somebody. So that's where I think also like with Parker and then any contingency plan too. Like I think that's gonna be a factor there. So they'll probably have it. Like I'm sure they can if they needed to, if they needed to make some kind of move to give themselves a chance to kind of up an offer. But if they aren't quite in that territory, then that could maybe even go so far as to limit them, or just they're only going to ultimately consider so much. I mean, like because also like think about how the season started, and when you're in the frame of mind of okay, is she gonna be okay and feel good with in terms of her knee and just kind of return to form slowly, because I mean they look great to start the season. Stevens was still out there. They look like they're going to be one of the better offenses in the league. So if they just bring this team back, like I don't think that's by no means is that a shortcoming or a failure. I would want to see what that looks like, and I don't know. It's it's why it's why the title of general manager, that comes with a lot of responsibility, and that's why they got to make that. James Wade has to make that decision of what's going to give them the best chance right now, but thinking about maybe how the next couple years would go. You've got to you've he, when somebody wearing that dual hat, like, you've got to put the best team out there you can. You're trying to win right now, but they're gonna have to think about what that'll look like beyond this year too.
Oh, they definitely need to look beyond this year. I mean, just if you look at the breakdown, you know, Vandersloot, Quigley, Dolson, Copper, DeShields, Mavunga, Stevens, and Gabby Williams, uh, all of them will be restricted or unrestricted free agents going into the 2022 season. So, you got a lot of players. You got to make a lot of decisions. This is called the long con, if you ask me. Any final thoughts on the Sky before we move on to the Connecticut
No,
Sun?
that's it for me.
Let's talk about this Connecticut Sun roster, this team. Um, I know you're a big fan of the makeup of the roster and what it could have been going into this past season. I'm curious for you, is it as simple as saying, bring back our roster as much as we can um, to move forward because we're finally going to have John Claude Jones paired up with Duana Bonner, Alyssa Thomas, Jasmine Thomas, and Breon January? I mean, that's a pretty star-studded roster right there. And we've gone to, I think we talked about this on the Patreon exclusive episode. Just this team is going to be a little bit tied salary cap wise, but it's going to be more about finding some role players that will fit in and give them what they need off the bench and have some youth. But I just went long on that. Give me your thoughts on if this team is at the point of just bring it back or we need to make some moves.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always looked at him as as a team that'll be keeping it together. It is funny to say that though, as they have only four players under contract for 2021 at the moment,
Yeah.
but you're also, with the caveat that I've yet to see, someone even suggest or think that, really strongly that Alyssa Thomas won't be brought back there. So you're going to have AT, Dewana Bonner, Jonquel Jones on big salaries. You've got Breon January under contract too, and then Jasmine Thomas at the point guard spot. I mean, I don't know. I don't see, like, there's just going to be some upgrade for them out there. I mean, Chelsea Gray being a free agent this offseason, I don't know. I don't know what Gray's going to be considering, if she's going to even look elsewhere at all. And I would also think LA would core her too. But other than that, I mean, there's not somebody out there that I would see as like some upgrade that Connecticut would want to think about at the point guard spot. So, they're going to have, so they're still going to have more spots maybe to fill out than some other teams on the bench. But in terms of the top of your rotation, they're going to be pretty set. And with those players making bigger salaries, they're not in a position like a Minnesota where Nafisa Collier is on her rookie contract still, right? So with those players making bigger salaries, that in that sense they might be a little more strapped, even though they can. I think Connecticut might get pretty interesting if they can really make a strong pitch to somebody to maybe be their first player off the bench or second one in a pretty decent sized role.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's if looking at the salary breakdown, looking at who they have, Bria Holmes, Essence Carson, Clena Mosqueda Lewis, Teresa Plaisance, Brianna Jones, Natasha Heidemann, Beatrix Montpierre. Like like you said, not a lot of players on contract right now. Fully expect a few of them, at least Alyssa and Jasmine, to come back. And the other ones, it's much more of a question, in my opinion, at least, of Kurt Miller sitting there and going, okay, is there somebody better that we want to put our eyes on first? If you're asking me, Mosqueda Lewis, that experiment did not go too well. She was kind of brought in to be that 3-point shooter, to be someone who could stretch the floor and add another element to them. And it's pretty easy to get excited about it, but for me, I kind of look at that position as, okay, who can we bring into this role? Who can possibly do that? And the two names that kind of pop up in my mind who would be great for that, I'm curious who you're thinking of, but I'm thinking of Raquana and Erica Wheeler. Raquana Williams, excuse me.
Yeah, so for me, thinking about like a wing shooter, I wrote down Sammy Whitcomb's name. One of
But can they? But do you think that they can? Because that's going to come down to them making an offer that stretching out that restricted offer.
yeah, it's. I think it can be possible. I'll say that. I mean, I don't know. I think they could swing it if they really wanted to. But then the two other names I wrote down, and these might be more pie in the sky, but I said Aerial Powers and Benai Delaney, and even and then the thing too with Connecticut is I wonder like could you maybe even offer? I would think there'll be at least slightly bigger offers for them just in terms of money, but could they maybe offer them a starting spot, and then would that have appeal? Can you ask January to come off the bench and maybe ask somebody like that, let them start at the two, at least to give it a shot.
That's an interesting move. Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. I think for them, it's kind of like it's a positive and a negative because they're in a situation where because they have so few people signed to contracts right now, they're not fully tied down onto it. So if you're Kurt Miller, you can go to the Thomases and say, "Hey, give me a week. Don't worry, you're going to get yours, but I want to see who else I can bring in. Can I convince a Powers? Can I convince another player to come over here and take on a different role and really put us over the top?" Because like we talk about this often, it's to win a championship, it's not just your starting five. You need some depth. You need someone who's going to fill that sixth woman, that seventh woman off the bench role, who can really put their team over the top and into a position where when your star players are taking a rester, it's not damaging you to the extent where then your stars need to kind of pick up the speed afterwards. I think it would be interesting. I feel like it's going to be tough for them to pay the Thomases in the way that they want. And then also you got to think to the future because Jonquel Jones is an unrestricted free agent going into the 2022 season, and so is January. So you need to not only think about just this season, but also long term. You have Bonner locked down until 2024, so you're good with that. But you kind of need to start planning out. And I feel like, yeah, I'm curious for you. Put on your GM cap, knowing that Jonquel Jones is unrestricted free agent next season, how concerned are you going into it that you need to kind of carve out a situation where you can get her paid and you're not going to kind of screw yourself over in the long term?
Well, I think that no, I think that goes unsaid. I mean, there's going to be Connecticut will be. Uh, uh, I'm sure they're going to be ready to. They're going to leave plan as if we've got a max slot reserved for JJ. January is a different case. Just as she's into her mid 30s and just how big is her role going to be? That I mean that she's also going to be an important player for them. But yeah, I'm sure they're gonna plan accordingly for Jones and make sure that they have her in the long term plans. But what you said about just kind of working it out for Jasmine and AT is, I think that's going to be it's a dynamic I'm interested to watch for all off season. Who knows how much we'll see it across the league? Just of is like you said, maybe are some will teams be able to kind of have some of their main free agents kind of wait a little bit and all right, let's see what we can do with this space, and hey, have can we come to an understanding? Well, if we can get names X, Y, or Z, then maybe we can sign you for this. But if we don't, then maybe we'll bump you up a little bit more. That kind of dynamic, I'm really fascinated to see if that ends up kind of rearing its head because teams have more of an option to do that with this new CBA, but just as each domino kind of falls, what does each player end up going for? And in a lot of cases, players naturally, understandably, I think want to get paid, and if they just are able to find a home, then it might get tougher as you're a contender. Uh, you can't have every single thing you want. It would be awesome if the Connecticut Sun could add a really reliable shooter off the bench, right? I think everyone agrees on that. is it going to happen? There's a pretty limited number of names in free agency, right? And just you know, it if it doesn't end up happening, it might even sting a little bit, or it might be an obvious thing to point to. But it's like, well, they did do a lot of the bigger stuff right. They have Bonner, they have Jones, they have At, they have all these players. So you can only do so much.
Oh yeah, and I mean like we saw this past season when the CBA just was brand fresh new, um, where Chicago was in a situation where they were able to pull that off with Vanderquigs, with Allie Quigley and Courtney Vandersloot, where they signed them super late, but were able to use that to make some different moves, and see what the possibilities were, and it really played out over the period of the free agency time. We also saw that from Connecticut when it came to Courtney Williams and Duana Bonner. Sometimes it works, sometimes it isn't. Yes, they were slightly different situations, but that definitely played its own effect. Any final thoughts when it comes to the Connecticut Sun before we move on to the DC Mystics?
Just for Connecticut, just what they end up doing with the backup spots at the 4 and the 5 will be interesting. Beatrice Montpremier and Tisha Heidemann in the backcourt, but Montpremier will be a reserve player, so they should have a chance to bring her back without putting a big strain on them financially. But then just what'll kind of be the prevailing thought coming away? Do they just, if they just bring back Brianna Jones and Montpremier, do they also add somebody else that maybe gives them a little shooting, that maybe is more of a 4, playing behind At? Does that, is that going to kind of stay open? Is that more of a thing where they have somebody compete in training camp? I've already brought up some of these names that I think are going to be like maybe backup bigs getting decent minutes for somebody, but like a Hawkins or Glory Johnson. But do they kind of bring somebody on new that's going to be getting real minutes there, or is it just kind of the same players there?
Well, and an interesting aspect of that is just looking at Brianna Jones and Teresa Plaisance and Essence Carson are all free agents. Also, obviously, Brianna Jones is a restricted free agent, so that's a little bit different. But I mean, there's going to be some openings where they can fill in and bring in some other players. I think it's going to be interesting, in my opinion, at least for this team, to see where do they go with that. As Kurt Miller has been notorious for riding his starters for like all 40 minutes over the past few seasons, the curiosity for me is, if you're doing that, do you then fill those roster spots with younger talent? As you know, a a big thing I think this coming season that maybe I haven't heard so much talk about, but there's a lot of players who made rosters this year because of people sitting out. And the Liberty are a good example of that. There's a good chunk of players, and we'll get to them, but there's a good chunk of players who got time to really show off. I mean, we always in the WNBA circles, we always talk about how it stinks that the training camp is so short. It stinks that there aren't more roster spots. All these things. For me, it's really interesting because now we're possibly going to see a situation where, with some of these players who sat out or whoever it is coming back, there's going to be some players who are on rosters and got some good tape on them these past few seasons. Will they now get an opportunity for a team like Connecticut, who maybe they won't get as many live minutes, but could still come in useful? We've seen of recent Kurt Miller start using some roster spots for some younger players to really grow that. And I think it will be an interesting aspect with him. Any thoughts on that before we move on to the Mystics?
No, let's get to the 2019 defending champs.
Washington Mystics are quite the interesting team this season. Um, you look at their. It's a complicated situation. It's an interesting position with bringing Tina Charles back. I've heard or I've seen a quote saying that they fully expect Tina to come back, which kind of leaves you with Emma Mieseman, Tina Charles, Emma Mieseman, and Ariel Powers as your leading unrestricted free agents. you can't forget about the fact that Latoya Sanders and Natasha Cloud are under suspended contracts. So the positive is that they only have 4 protected contracts available. So you can kind of dangle, and this is an interesting aspect of free agency where you can kind of give and take with contract length and contract size, with saying it might not be as big as this other team can offer you, but our money is guaranteed. So you're making that money no matter what happens. Um, put Talk to me about where you are if you're coach team, what you're thinking about what to do for this team. It's going to be a very different style team than we saw when they won their championship, and I think that was cemented when Tina Charles joined the team and they lost Christy Tolliver. Talk to me about where your head is with the Washington Mystics.
At first, I thought that that Washington was going to be the number one example of just having a really hard time trying to fit everybody in. Not to say that they won't, but my stance has definitely softened there, and the context kind of adds to it. You mentioned Cloud and Sanders being suspended contracts, according to her hoop stats. So, Washington's going to have the chance to, only negotiate with them. And then, but then even like Miesman and Charles, I almost like see them in the same way, right? Just, I don't like Tina Charles wanted to get traded and wanted to go there. So is she really going to walk? Because also like, where's the destination, right? That's just going to like, wow, like knock her socks off with some big offer. So I can't see it there. And then Miesman too. I mean, Miesman's been there her whole career, right? I mean, just in almost in the same way as Charles has a great relationship with Tebow, and it's just I just don't see like uh, them being terrified that Charles and Miesman may consider going elsewhere. So really, I think it just kind of comes down to powers. Like I think Tiana Hawkins, who's also an unrestricted free agent, is a good player. But just look at all the names we just rattled off at the position, right? Deladon, Misaman, Charles, Sanders, if she comes back, and then Maisha Hines Allen, by the way, too, coming off that big season. So I just think Hawkins just might be on the wrong end of a numbers game. But I just think Powers is the big one. Just what's going to happen there? What does Powers want? What are they willing to offer? I think that's going to be the most interesting story.
Well, the interesting aspect for me with Tiana Hawkins is, you know, this past season might have cost her a lot of money, and this is like a completely different discussion. But coming off that championship season, obviously everyone on that roster, when you come off a championship season, as a role player, whatever it is, I feel like there's this kind of fog around you where everybody automatically looks at the positives. Nobody goes, oh, this team won the championship despite you underperforming. Everyone looks at it from the perspective of, oh my God, this player did so well. And that's one of the reasons this team won. We see it in the coaching world often where a coach will come off of whatever team it was and they're an assistant coach, but they get all the credit for whatever success that team had, as if there wasn't a head coach or players doing a lot of it too. So for me, it's kind of interesting because Tiana Hawkins' stock after last season was probably an all-time high. After this past season with some injuries and, I'm not going to knock her performance this past year, but was she as good as what we saw, 2 seasons ago in their championship run? No. A lot of that had to do with many other aspects of it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think she's going to be the one who walks.
I think I
Hopefully
think you're
she
being
can.
I think you're being a little
Yeah.
harsh on Hawkins. Hawkins is a good player, and like,
No, she is. But I'm just saying, like, if she was a good player that was surrounded by so much talent that there was double teams and triple teams going on, which was giving her open looks.
yeah, yeah,
Is she going to be
yeah.
able to hit those shots with a
Well,
defender?
I'm not saying someone's going to pay her to be a max contract to be a starter. I mean, like as a backup four, I would think she's in a great spot going into free agency. It just some teams around the league like barely have any shooting at the position, so just I think Hawkins just can really fit pretty easily with just about anybody. So
I don't think that's a crazy aspect. I think, look, I believe we're both on the same mindset where the most important thing for them to do is find a way to bring back Powers. Ariel Powers is the key for this team. She's kind of the glue. She's that element that they truly need, assuming everyone comes back. You know what I mean? I don't see them. I think for the Mystics, it's very much so. Like we everything's in house. They have all the ingredients to make a push deep in the playoffs. It's going to be more of a question of, how does Tina Charles gel with this team, and how does the loss of Christy Tolliver really affect them, and how can Leilani Mitchell? Well, there's a lot of questions, I guess. Maisha Hines Allen, what are we going to see from her now that maybe she's not a starter anymore? Maybe she's not getting as many minutes, and she's not going to be able to produce at that volume we've seen before. I mean, the Mystics, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, are kind of the team that almost has the biggest question mark going into this next season, just because, and maybe I'm giving too much to the Tina Charles, Christy Tolliver switcheroo, um, but assuming they bring everyone back and the really only switch is Christy Tolliver and Tina Charles, I'm curious for you where you put this team as far as like a power ranking in this league.
If if they're able to re-sign Powers along with everybody else, I think they're right up there again to in the conversation to get a top 2 seed and be one of the contenders. Especially if they aren't able to bring back Powers, I do wonder a little bit. Are they, stylistically, are they going to play with the three big lineups a majority of the time, or even by default, just kind of because of the makeup of the roster? Or are they going to be able to play just some more traditional lineups? If they don't have Powers, you can still play. You could play Mitchell and Cloud and Atkins, right? But just to also try to get your front court players on the court, right? To get Hines Allen minutes, to and Meesman and Charles and Sanders if she's back, along with Deldon, of course. So it just kind of how much they want to play big, I think is also just going to make them a really interesting watch too.
Question: if they can't get Powers, who do you like? Do you think it's a situation where they go, okay, we couldn't get Powers, obviously not ideal, but hunker down, draft pick, look forward, or is it a situation of we can't get Powers, let's try and bring somebody new
Well,
in?
they don't have any draft picks. All three of them
Uh,
are gone in the Tina
well,
Charles trade. So it I don't know the middle there. I don't know if there's a great middle ground option for them. Uh, it's just I mentioned, we've talked about these, elite players in the front court as free agents, but also, that group of players on the perimeter: Powers, Kayla McBride, Benai Jelani, Alicia Gray, Chelsea Gray. They all are really valuable players, and you'd think they're going to command big contracts. So I don't think, one of them isn't just going to be like standing there when the music stops, like, oh, I guess I'll just go sign somewhere, for and leave some money on the table. I don't think those players are going to have to make those kind of sacrifices. So I think they might end up having to do a little bit more, hunting for some bargains, or just trying to sign players, and maybe somebody really good will also just be willing to sacrifice to go play for a good team, or maybe they make look a trade too. Is what's
Well, to be fair, that's what I meant when it came to the draft pick was they have some players, on reserved contracts or whatever. Maybe you try and do a little sign and trade, something like that. Get a draft pick if there's someone there, because Coach T has done a tremendous job of being able to ID and pick some diamonds out of the rough that maybe got overlooked by others.
Yeah, I mean, maybe especially to like get into the second round, that might be possible. Especially with, like, Indiana has a bunch of picks in the late rounds, and Dallas, are they gonna have a use for those second round picks anyways? I would think some of those might be gettable. If you want to get even higher than that, I was gonna bring it up. I mean, maybe you take a look at what Hines Allen's value is around the league. That would be, maybe a little bit of a bigger move. If like Dallas, right, they're sitting there with multiple first round picks. Like if you can get that kind of return for Hines Allen, that could be, and if you would have to feel good too that Meesman's going to at least play a few more years along with Tina. But maybe that's a way to kind of to replenish a little bit through the draft, if you can pick up a few picks, and you can hit on those, and those are players on rookie deals, which helps you out when you have some veterans on the team. So
Wait, I'm curious now. Sorry, we're gonna go over on this, but so you think Heinz Allen is the trade fodder if they're thinking that mindset? You don't think it's somebody else?
well, I don't know who else they're gonna trade to get a big return for. I don't see any of these other free agents commanding a big return. At least, I mean, players that they would want to trade. You know, they can't. They wouldn't want to trade Natasha Cloud. They need a Natasha Cloud badly, but just like
They need to touch
the
Cloud
makeup
badly,
of their.
but what about Emma?
Well, does Meesman even
I know you're in a different camp than me, but I
does
just feel
Meesman
like
want to play anywhere else though?
I
That's the thing. It just
true.
and they're trying to win right now. Like I wouldn't, no, I wouldn't want to trade Meesman's skill set. It's too valuable. Her shooting, she's done it on the biggest stage. Um, I mean, I don't know if it would be a very popular move in the locker room too, to trade a player that popular who was the Finals MVP last time your team was healthy. I mean, Heinz Allen. It's just Heinz Allen's in the last year of a rookie contract, so she's going to have to get a raise when Atkins is also going to get one, and Atkins is going to have to be much more of a priority, I would think, just because of her position. So just they're looking at a stacked roster at that position. So just if they want Heinz Allen to be a featured player for the long term, maybe that does affect what they kind of do with some of these other players. But it just okay. But they can't. Are they going to say like Tina Charles and Emma Meesman come off the bench, take a back seat to Heinz Allen? I don't know what all that's going to look like.
They can go so many different avenues. It's like you have too many options. It's a very interesting issue for Coach T to have in this situation. But I mean, I agree with you. I think I have recency bias for Heinz Allen just because of the amazing season she had this past year. But I just feel like you're talking a situation where I wouldn't so cavalierly look at it as Emma versus Maisha. It's definitely Maisha on the trading block, only because, like you're talking about, Emma's coming off all those positives, might be demanding a slightly higher contract, maybe a maxed out contract, as opposed to Maisha Hines Allen, who has one good season under her belt. You can kind of finagle that a little bit more, make that a lesser of a burden of a contract, and also which one of them has the higher want in the league right now. Yes, Maisha Hines Allen had a great season, is probably a top commodity if you're talking about it. Lots of teams would want her, but lots of teams would also want Emma. So for me, it's kind of, I don't know. I wouldn't be mad at them. I would see it as a long term move, dropping Emma. I think you still have a lot of power, a lot of offensive ability. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I would take Emma over Tina, but hey, that's not the situation we're in, right?
Well, I mean, if that's what you think they should do, then say it. But just
I'm a, I'm gonna call Coach T and tell him to do it right now. We know he listens to me, so well, let's move on to the Atlanta Dream, team number one of our different perspective, different mindset. Do we feel this team is in the mindset of making one trade and all of a sudden, they're back in the playoff race, and maybe they're making a push for the final semifinals, maybe the finals, or do we feel like this is a team that needs to kind of sit down for one more season, let their young players grow more? I already have my opinion, but I'm curious yours.
neither. I think they're in the middle of that. Well, no. I agree on the first part, where if they swing a big move, yeah, they could possibly be into contention. As is, basically with this team, I think they are competing for a playoff spot, and I think they still have enough vets where they're. I mean, they're just not. They're in a fundamentally different place than somebody like New York, where you can get into whether what New York, as an example, should be doing, right? But just they have much like they have a much higher concentration of really young players on the roster. So I don't I no, I mean Atlanta just I don't why would you just sit on your hands? I think you go for it if you can. I mean, yeah, get somebody that makes sense. But I think they can compete for a playoff team if they have for a playoff spot if they have this whole team together. And yeah, you got to look for a big move if you can. Everybody does.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's a little bit more clear cut for me where they go for the home run hit. I mean, if you can get Liz Cambage or Natasha Howard, that completely, and I'm saying this with the assumption that they no longer have Elizabeth Williams on the roster. If you can make those moves, I mean, we can talk about a lot of teams where if you add those players, obviously, look, those are some of the top players in the league right now. So it's not, I'm not saying this in jest, like, oh, just add them and all of a sudden we're a team that's competing for something in the playoffs here. But I just feel like this team is so close. They're on the doorstep of that. They have so much power in the guard positions, they have so much offensive ability. The question for me, and honestly, for a few years now is kind of what what's the next step for this for the front court. You know, what do you and I have talked about this to an exhausted manner of Monique Billings, and Elizabeth Williams just not being the right fit for this team. You can't have two of them; they just fill too much of the same needs. They check so much of the same box. But I guess I'll start this off with a two-part question. One, if you're the Atlanta Dream and you could have Natasha Howard, Candace Parker, or Liz Cambage, which player do you think is the best fit out of those three? So that's my first question for you. And I'll let you answer before we move on.
I'd probably say Howard.
Yeah, I agree. I think Howard with
I mean, all things equal, just I think to sorry, I'll to actually give more than a one word answer. Just on a multi-year deal, you're still trying to build for. You still want to continue to build around Kennedy Carter, who's going to continue to get better. But thinking about it in terms of like a 3-year deal, that length of an investment, I would go for Howard too. Because I mean, I think you're also probably looking at playing this player next to Elizabeth Williams as opposed to because if you add somebody over Williams, then you still have that issue of who's playing the four.
yeah, I I'm more of a Billings fan than you will. Um, do you try and I believe at certain points they tried to play small, put Shakina at the four, which was kind of weird. Maybe my eyes deceived me. Um, I just yeah, I guess when you look at it like that, but I mean, we could talk about starting five with this team. Obviously, I believe for the Dream, signing Benai Jelani is important. It's a big move that they want. If I'm the Dream, I'm looking to bring somebody who can stretch the floor. Natasha Howard fits that to a T. Liz Cambage would be a great fit also, but I just think Natasha Howard's athleticism and stamina with with a healthy Courtney Williams, a healthy Tiffany Hayes, and not even to get into Kennedy Carter because that's just exhausting to watch them play in that mindset. So you're saying you think Billings is the one to like? All right, now let me rephrase this. Talking about this roster, I believe we both agree that either Williams or Billings, one of them needs to go. Which one do you feel needs to go for this team to take that next step? Obviously, there's the caveat of who they're replacing her with.
I don't think they need to go. Why can't Billings just come off the bench?
Billings can come off the bench. My issue is more so Elizabeth Williams getting a guaranteed contract, and I, I just personally, I'm more of a fan of Billings than I am of Williams. But continue.
Well, I just don't. I mean, Williams is just a much better defensive player. I mean, talking about anchoring you at the five, I do like. I think Billings might be interesting. Maybe playing some five, like off the bench against some second units, and just to maybe maximize what she can do offensively a little bit more. But no, I mean, someone to play a bunch of minutes at such an important defensive position. I mean, it's clearly Williams. But yeah, and to the point of the protected contracts too, I think they're going to be okay because all of them right now, her hoop stats has them expiring after this season. So it's not really a long term issue for them right now. It would really just be if like three of the top free agents in this class all wanted to sign there, then yeah, you might have to do stuff. But if it gets to that point, you do what you have to at that point, and you can always, you know, you can make a move when you need to when you're doing something of that magnitude. But I don't think Williams is still a really good player. Like it's not uh the, they can they can find somebody that's a little bit better of an offensive fit, and maybe Strickland plays the four a little bit. Maybe it's that, but just that can really help Elizabeth, because if you've got a shooting threat at the four, which isn't necessarily one of the players we brought up there, but then Williams is diving to the basket, with more of an empty lane, in pick and roll with Kennedy Carter or Tiffany Hayes or Laney or Courtney Williams, then it'll look much better, and life will be much easier for Williams too.
All right, so we're looking at the four. Talk to me about who you think would be good fits. I mean, Kiana Hawkins might be a good stretch for that. Amanda Zawi B, played a little small. Cheyenne Parker. I mean, maybe even Teresa Plaisance. There is that. There's a connection there. Not going to get into that. But, I mean, talk to me about who you feel would be a good fit to bring into this team through free agency that would help push this team to that next level.
Yeah, I mean that's where I think you get more into wondering, like, Natasha Howard isn't an elite 3-point shooter. She can at least stand out there and she'll take them. But if you get somebody like Howard, maybe she also plays. There's the option to also play her at the five a little bit. I wonder if Cheyenne Parker will get kind of pursued by any team, and if so, is it starting center, or even maybe is it where she is, maybe playing with, if you're playing with Williams, Williams is clearly the center. Just when you think about her offensive skill set, uh, I don't know. I don't know if there's a slam dunk solution here. I think if you can get one of these players, you just do it. But there's also the possibility, I think, that they're drafting somebody that might fill more of a pure kind of stretch big kind of definition.
Possibly. I mean, the interesting aspect that you touched on, or one of the interesting aspects, is looking at their, looking past this season. Courtney Williams, free agent. Shakina Strickland, a free agent. Tiffany Hayes, Elizabeth Williams. Renee Montgomery's on a suspended contract from sitting out this past season. Blake Diedrich, Kayla Davis, currently are restricted free agents. I think it's interesting because the Atlanta Dream are kind of in a situation where, they can use this season to reevaluate. Maybe that's not the best situation for head coach Nikki Collin, but it's a situation where when you are looking at the salary cap and looking at who's on their roster and the contracts, they're kind of in a weird situation of, they could either be forging forward into a deep playoff team, or they could very much be on the precipice of another rebuild. What do you think about that?
That doesn't seem likely. I mean, they've had 2 seasons being in the lottery. You have good reason to say our roster, the full version of our roster last year is better than how they finished. So it just, and even the roster they actually had there had Carter just not had that ankle injury. So yeah, I mean, just, again, I just don't think they're in the position, when you look at the top players on the roster right now, where they just want to say, hey, yeah, let's rebuild, let's kind of settle for that. If it doesn't pan out, you go for it now. I would think you have good players on the team already, and just figure that stuff out later when it comes to it. I mean, it just, they got to find out how good this team is, right? They made the splashy moves to land Williams and Strickland, but then getting the chance to see Hayes play with them, and Laney after the nice season she had, and now Carter in year 2 getting a chance to improve. I think there should be a level of excitement. Figure it out, and just see what sticks. And if you're all healthy, you should get a chance to really learn something, because I think they will be a playoff team.
Any final thoughts on the Atlanta Dream before we move on to Indiana Fever?
No, they were kind of a one need team. It was just kind of that one thing with them. So
I completely agree with you in regards to we didn't really get to see who they were, right? Because so many COVID related issues, then an injury to your rookie of the year candidate, all these things. But hey, the one positive of it, Benigel Laney's emergence throughout this past season. Let's move on to the Indiana Fever. I'll let you take this one. For me, they're a head scratcher of a team because they have a vet presence. They have a very strong youth movement, and by strong I mean lots of high rated picks. But it just doesn't seem to be clicking. Do you feel that? I mean, where do you think the mindset of this roster is? You know, obviously, I feel strongly they're not a trade away from a playoff, a big playoff push, and they kind of need to see more growth from their players. Obviously, in regard to Cox, but I talk to me.
well, do you? So are you asking what do I think they're thinking, or what do I think they should do?
What you think they should do? We're not going to get into try and mind
Okay.
read what we think they are thinking because that's a whole different story.
I think they should just be patient. I mean, they got to see what they have with Lauren Cox and Tierra McCowan together. Yeah, and just I don't think I don't expect one of those top free agent bigs either to just be pushing their way to Indiana. Uh, so it just given where they're at, and just I don't think they'll struggle to find a payday that they're seeking. So I think they got to be patient. Get this really make sure you get a good look at Cox and McCowan, and at the point guard spot, making a decision there after not seeing Erica Wheeler at all this season. I don't know if there's I don't know that there are big uh like starting point guard vacancies out there for Wheeler. So, do you just work something out there, you get Wheeler back and see what Julie Alleman's plans are for the season, and you have your point guards there, because I think they're gonna have to think about if they would consider drafting one at 4 this year. But if you sign Wheeler, and maybe there's still you can still take a player there, and they can both get some minutes there. And then maybe at the small forward spot is the one thing. Maybe that's where they really make a run at somebody that's just a good scorer, but also somebody that can open up the floor a little bit for Cox and McCowan inside. So the same group of names we've already brought up: Ariel Powers, Kayla McBride, Alicia Gray, maybe even Laney. Although maybe that isn't likely after Laney had already been there.
I mean, they can throw a ton of money though.
Yeah,
They have 8 players on roster right now with seven like almost 8,000 or 800,000, excuse me, in salary cap. So like this is a team that if someone's gonna make a push for Powers, make a push for Laney, make a push for heck, they can make a push for anybody in free agency with the money they have.
yeah. So I wonder if they also can be a source of leverage for one of these players, right? Could they be the team that Alicia Gray can go get the offer sheet that she wants? If there's a discrepancy in what Dallas is offering, just maybe on the length of it, or even the amount, or Washington and Vegas, Powers and McBride are interesting cases. Are those teams asking those players to take a little less, or are they not offering necessarily a max contract? Well, then maybe Indiana's the team that pops up and says, "Hey, we'll give it to you." It probably doesn't hurt our bottom line, at least for probably the next 2 seasons, if we sign somebody to maybe a little bit more than what somebody else would give them.
Oh, I mean, let's look at this. Kelsey Mitchell is going to be a restricted free agent next season. Victoria Vivian's assume I don't know what her timetable to return is, but she's going to be reserved, and Alaman also reserved. Excuse me, after this coming season. I mean, it almost gets better. I mean, I don't know. This is a very interesting situation for Indiana. I mean, Tamika Catchings has really the ability to choose her own adventure and figure out where this team is going to go. If you're going to pick one player this team, mercilessly hounds to bring them on, who is that player? Who do you feel in this free agency could really help, change the tide for the Indiana Fever? Or maybe break the fever? I don't know if that's the right term.
Change the I don't know, change the tide. What are we?
I'm using crazy terminology there.
I don't know if it just like they just have to see what they have with these young players. I mean, they haven't shot all the way up to the very top of the draft in the lottery recently, but like that's how you get your really good players. Just is Tierra McCowan going to be more of a go-to scorer? Then if they believe that, then they've got to try to create the best situation possible. So that's where I think like getting maybe one more really good shooter that can help them open up the floor. So I would just think of it much more in that sense. Kelsey Mitchell, I think, is somebody that can continue to get better. So that's a positive for them. And I don't know. It just I don't know what like I don't think there's very many things just to consider for them for free agency unless I don't know unless they just make a big offer to somebody and I'm just kind of downplaying the odds that would happen. But I think all these other players are gonna have chances to win somewhere else while still getting paid, and Indiana's just they've gotta embrace more of a patient approach.
Yeah, I agree with you. Because, like, realistically, I view them similarly to the Liberty and similarly to the Wings, where and like, obviously the timetables are slightly off, slightly different. But to me, it truly just boils down to realistically, you're not winning the championship for the next X amount of years. You have X amount of young players who need an opportunity to flourish and for you to fully understand where they're going to kind of peak when it comes to their potential. And then why are we going to waste so much, like, and I think I said this at the beginning, throwing a ton of money at someone could be great, but does that damage the growth of a player that you spent, your first round pick on? Does that damage the growth of a player who you need to be a higher level player, growing down the field? Because they have a lot of players on rookie scale contracts. That's a positive thing, especially for how many of them were top 5 draft picks or top 10 draft picks. So we got to look at this in a situation where the Indiana Fever, it might not be the greatest news if you're an Indiana Fever fan, but you kind of got to be patient with it. You got to understand it's not going to all of a sudden change. There's not too many things. I feel like that being said, I do feel like we should talk about who are some players, considering the fact that they only have 8 players on roster, who are some players that you expect them or could see them targeting or signing. Running over it, Candice Dupree, Natalie Achanwa, Jantel Lavender, Erica Wheeler are all unrestricted free agents this season.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Powers, Alicia Gray, McBride, bring back Wheeler, I would say. And I don't know if they didn't work something out with Wheeler, could they be a team that tries to get in on Jasmine Thomas? I don't know. So at the point guard position, I don't know what else to say other than just bringing back Wheeler and looking to the front court. Could they be a Cheyenne Parker team? I think that's one name I wondered about. I think because I think Parker could play. Parker, I think, can play with Cox or McCowan, but I don't know. Then if you're kind of conceding, Parker's a good player, but she's not pushing. That signing alone isn't exactly pushing Fever to be like a top 4 team. So, you'd be short circuiting the time Cox and McCowan can play together. I don't really love that fit personally, but for them to have drafted Cox, I can only think they want to do that. So yeah, I mean, just again, somebody at small forward that can shoot. Kia Vaughn as a vet behind McCowan, that might be someone that could help them.
I like that
That's
signing,
about
actually.
it.
I had that written down, so I'm not even going to try and claim that. I feel like a classic Indiana signing would be Amanda Zahui B. Just like her style of play, very much so, just reminds me of many of the bigs who have come through Indiana over the past, 8 years or so. Um, any final thoughts on the Indiana Fever before we talk about uh, the New York Liberty, the torchbearers of the WNBA?
That's all I got. Ready for New York.
So New York's a curious situation, and I'm gonna, ask you to put your GM cap on and ask you the tough question of who you drop it. Who's not gonna make this roster, or is it just as simple as find a way to do it? Because it's gonna be tough. You got Megan Walker, Jasmine Jones, Kylie Shug, Liana Odom, Jocelyn Willoughby, and then Rebecca Allen and Steph Talbot, which Talbot kind of has an asterisk next to it. It's an interesting aspect. But I'm curious for you, you know, we talk. I'll start it off with, first of all, who are we going to drop, but also where do you think their mindset is? Do you agree with me that they need to kind of sit on their hands and let their young players grow, or do you feel that you've seen enough from these young players that one or two big moves can bring this team to a next tier in this league?
Uh, no, I think they're in a little bit better of a position to chase somebody in free agency if they want to with a bigger name. If they get somebody to start at center, they're not, they're not blocking a recent lottery pick. It's, Kylie Shook and Kia Stokes, or even somebody at the four where that's just a giant question mark. It looks like. So I don't think there's a problem and just the mindset of hey, we're in New York. I don't know how much that, and from the ownership perspective too, I don't know how if there's much pressure for them to go be aggressive, but I don't think it's really a problem for them as opposed to like Indiana if they want to go make a run at somebody.
Well, the cool aspect about the Liberty is they have 12 players on roster, right? And they still have almost 500,000 in cap room. So you really have the ability, is Hansu coming over? Johannes, is she coming over? What's the deal with Talbot and Rebecca Allen? There's definitely some question marks considering the fact that they have such an overseas presence. It's I'm all right. So now get me to my question number two. Assuming, I mean, it's a tough situation because we're assuming Rebecca Allen, Steph Talbot, are coming back. Johannes is coming. Things like that. I'm curious for you. Which of these younger players do you feel is going to be the first on the chopping block?
Yeah, that's tough. I would start with Liana Odo, Megan Walker, and Jasmine Jones. Probably those three. Well, I would say Han first. I don't know. I don't see much potential for Han other than maybe in a bench role. So in terms of the ones under contract, I think it would be those three names. They started Odom good chunk of the season, so I don't know if that's all that likely. But Walker got drafted higher than Odom,
Right.
so I don't know how much of an anchoring effect is there. Walker obviously didn't play nearly as much, and Jones did play a lot and had the counting stats. But Jones, I think it's the thing of, I think Jones is kind of a just kind of a two who can handle the ball some. Isn't a point guard by trade. So I think it might be tough for Jones too. I wonder if that's someone who just, if you have some trade value there, if Johannes is coming over and they might not be able to know right away. So that might make it tough. But if you've got Sabrina Ionescu at point, Laser Clarendon also in there, Asia Dur, I think you kind of got to make a decision there on somebody. And I still think Dur can be a really good player, but as far as what their vision is, again, with them too, with what they're going to do in the draft, whether they hold on to their pick or whatever they end up doing, what are they pretty much resigned to just taking a big, or would they even take somebody on the perimeter and that bumps everyone else down a notch?
Well, this team is so stacked with youth in the guard positions. I mean, in my mind, you're not starting Clarendon because I mean, obviously, well, what's Kia Nurse's availability? You know, how's she
Well,
feeling?
they did though. They did start Leisure to start the season next to Sabrina.
Yeah, but
So
they didn't
that's
have Asia.
right. But if they want, if they want kind of two point guards on the floor, that that's where this all ties in too. To then how much does that leave for Durr and Jones and Johannes? So that was why Jones kind of came up for me.
No, I hear you. I do think Jones is out of those ones kind of going to be the first to the chopping block. Megan Walker, I feel like, because of the height of her pick, because of the fact that, she had a little bit more hype around herself, maybe has a slightly higher ceiling, unless they, saw something that we didn't. But I just think it's going to be an interesting situation of, okay, I've said interesting situation so many times because like we're just trying to assume what all these GMs and coaches want to do and what they see from these players. Um, but for me, I just think it's so much about the front court for this team. What did we see from Kylie Shook this season? What do we know about her? What confidence do we have? We know during the season, Kia Stokes re-signed that extension. So what does that mean for her? There's so many questions with this team. While I do think that they're closer to making a playoff push, assuming a lot of their vets come back that we didn't see this past season, I do think it's an interesting situation of they have so much young talent. Am I being too hard on the fact that I just don't see them making a big playoff push, so they shouldn't be focusing on making some big moves? Or do you agree with me that they're kind of in a tough situation where they kind of just need to sit back and watch their youth grow?
Uh, no, I think they should. I think they should make a push for somebody if they can. I mean, you need to get better and just not to get caught up in just the having this perfect linear nature to it. I mean, if you can get a legitimate difference maker, then just do it. They're not again just like who are they blocking if they do that? I just don't. It's a non-issue to me.
Yeah, no, I hear you. As long as that difference maker isn't big. Like if we're talking about
Yeah,
adding,
yeah.
a Liz Cambasia or Natasha Howard, I'm all for it. Other than that, like who else could they bring that wouldn't just be taking away? And granted, you might be adding somebody who's better than Kylie Shook, who's better than Willoughby or some of these other players, but it's that give and take of you know prospect and potential versus what we've seen established. And there just aren't so many giant names that I think turn this team into a contention for a championship. And I don't think either of us are talking about that. But part of me just, you know, you made this commitment this past season. Part of it, your hands were tied. Part of it was a mission of we're going to have all these rookies and see what we can get from them and try and truly gauge where they are. And I know we've talked at length during the season on what was Winsidr Daily, now is Split the Post, but or sorry, the floor game. God, I'm just off of it today. Um, but for me, I just always side with if you're not going to legitimately like be in contention for the championship, then why not give your young players a little bit more time to show who they are so you can grow? I, is that crazy?
No, but I mean, just like you can, whatever, pick a name. I mean, you can add Natasha Howard and still find minutes for Kylie Shook. It's just, I don't, it just, they don't have that conflicting reality. And I mean, they also don't know what they're going to get with the number one pick. They're not going to know yet which early entrants are going to be in this draft. So it just, I don't know. I just think, I think a lot of this can get overrated. Like, oh, they have all these players. They have, well, I don't know if Johannes and Rebecca Allen aren't even going to play this year. Okay, then that's two decisions you don't have to make. Hanju, I'm not sure. I'm not sold 100%. She's a WNBA player. So if they have to move on from her, I don't think it's the end of the world. So I don't think it ultimately amounts to very much for them in terms of having to just, waive a bunch of players. And it was a different situation. But we saw it with Dallas last year. Everyone's saying, "Oh, what are they going to do? They have all these players. Let's make jokes about Dallas." You have time to figure it out, and it doesn't. They won 2 games, right? Like Jonathan Kolb said it after the lottery. Like, we won 2 games. Go get, like, you need stars. If you can go get one, go get one. And just, if they don't, then see what you have. You're gonna have Sabrina back. You'll have excitement alone just because of that, and see what you can get in the draft.
Hey, I'm with it. They're it's gonna be a fun season for them. It's gonna be a hair pulling season if you're a fan. I don't know what big moves I could see them making, but hey, they got the salary cap to throw some money at some players and see if they can bring someone on, make some moves. Hopefully, Jonathan Cope can shake and bake a little bit. Entice some people who want to come to the Big Apple. Any final thoughts on New York or any of the teams that we touched on before we log off for the day?
Yeah, I mean, let's. I think we should probably talk more about Zowie for New York,
Oh yeah.
the player that's actually a free agent. So, what are you willing to do for them? Are you Stokes already has that 1 year extension signed? So, do you want to bring Zowie back? What are you willing to offer? What would you be willing to offer as them in terms of a role?
Uh, See, that's such like a I don't know for me, and this was something that I was critical of Katie Smith's team. When she took over for Bill Lambier, where it was just like at a certain point, when do you kind of cut the string and say, you know what, we've seen what we're going to get from this player, and like I'm fine doing punting for another season, not for another season, but punting on a specific position so we can grow a younger player, learn more about a younger player. So for me, you let her walk. I don't. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Do you want to bring her back if you're New York?
Yeah, I think I do agree. Well, it's hard to evaluate this in a vacuum because Stokes and Zowie aren't free agents at the same time, so you aren't necessarily picking one or the other. Although it's not like they're in uh, they're gonna be in real trouble trying to stay under the cap this year. But I think I'd be willing to move on at this point. I'm not super sold on either player as a long term starting center. And if both of them were on the open market, I don't know. Looking around the league at just looking at spots, I don't know who how that there are a bunch of other teams that would be making that same gamble. So I would want to let Shook play a little bit next year, at least get a decent amount of run to see what you have there. So I think you do have to kind of choose one or the other, and I would think giving Stokes the 1 year extension was maybe a little bit of an indication that that might be the thought there. So
No, I'm with you.
I'm okay with it.
I think it was a clear indication, especially because it's a guaranteed. So, for me, it's that it's pretty much a done deal. I should mention, excuse me, that they only have two protected or guaranteed contracts, which means they do have availability if they want to make some moves, or they want to offer up some money to a free agent or in a trade. They do have some wiggle room there and some ability to entice people. Obviously, location's a big one too. And if they are going to be in market this coming season, which it seems more and more likely as the days go by that they will be, that's a positive too. Being able to be part of the Brooklyn Nets, um, you know, being able to, I believe I saw that they're going to be sharing some facilities. Maybe that's not right. Maybe I misread that, and I'll just have to delete this from the podcast. But you know, there's a lot of positives with being on this new franchise. But when I say new franchise, this new franchise under new ownership, and we've seen a commitment from the ownership for this team, and I think that's a huge element. Also, we saw it as Las Vegas Aces became a place where people wanted to go and play and had a great time, and I think we're seeing that also in New York, which is something that we can't necessarily quantify, but we know it's a thing, right?
Yeah, well, and just on New York too, it just the in like deciding what they do, like when we were kind of talking about like, well, what should they be willing to go get somebody? the one thing they absolutely can't do is just don't overpay someone. Just don't go spend a bunch of money and tie yourself up for 3 years or something like that on somebody that just isn't gonna make a big difference for you, and that'll complicate things down the line when some of these younger players might be getting extensions. So that's really the one thing, maybe even the bigger thing that we didn't even bring up right away. Just you know, I think this free agency class, like the lines are pretty drawn pretty clearly already for you. We know who the really good established players are. If you can get one of them, great. That'd be awesome. If you can't, they already took a pretty, I think it in in context to recent years, a pretty radical step to have just kept as many rookies as they did. Just see what you got and continue to build through the draft. Like that's still the best way to get stars. If you're, you know, don't rush to be the eighth or the ninth best team if you aren't really, landing players that are really gonna have a ton of upside because, you know, you can build through the draft. That's still the number one way. Like get a really good player. And having the number one pick, like they do this year, that's a big difference than Indiana, who's been at the bottom of the lottery by comparison a few times.
I agree with you. Well, that's all we got for this episode. Make sure to tune in on Winsidr.com or the Winsidr show on your favorite podcast app. And we'll be back with some fun guests over the next week. We got 3 guests lined up, so get ready. Not going to tease anything, not going to let you know, but make sure you hit subscribe.